Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I see that folks are still joining, so we're going to wait for a minute or two before we get started. Thank you again for joining us. Okay, we have about 41, 42 people. Um, Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Um, My name is Daud Demos. I'm the client and community manager at Jumpstart Refugee Talent. I'm joined by my colleague Safi, who will be assisting us with tech-related stuff. And we are very honored to be joined by Camara Chambers. So Camara will be introducing herself in more detail just in a little bit. But Camara is the Director of Leadership and Development at the Dais. It's an organization affiliated with the Toronto Metropolitan University. So as I said, she's going to share a little bit about her journey to Canada, her experiences, as well as her work in leadership and development. But before we hand over the mic to Kamara, I'm going to run a quick poll or a few polls, just to learn a little bit about our participants today. Um, I think there are 3 or 4 questions, so I promise they will be very quick. Um, and let me just share them. There you go. So the Zoom poll is now being launched. Go ahead and vote. So the first question is, what is your current employment status? Are you unemployed? Are you working on a survival job? Are you underemployed? Meaning you are in your industry, you're working on an area where you'll be gaining some experience and whatnot, but it's not at the level um, as you are back home. And are you meaningfully employed? Meaning, are you doing a job that you like that matches your experiences? And the second question that we have is, what are the biggest challenges you're facing in your job search or career development journey? I see that a lot of you are already voting on that, and it's a straightforward question. The third question is, on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident do you feel about your current job search strategies in Canada? So 1 being not confident at all, and 5 being very confident. And the fourth and last question is, which networking strategies have you tried from the ones that are listed there? And I'm sorry, I should have added other. I'm sure you have other strategies, but from the ones listed there, which ones have you used? Um, which networking strategies have you used? Looks like, yeah, there is one. I haven't tried any of those. So um, I see 53% of you participated in this Zoom poll. So I'll give another minute maybe for everyone to vote. And then I'll show you the results. I'll share the results with everybody. You cannot see. I know some of you are writing on the chat that you cannot see the Zoom poll. So if you're using your phone, maybe try to change screen. I don't know what could be the reason you're not seeing the Zoom pulse on your phone or on your laptop. So 64% of you participated in this Zoom poll. If you're using a PC, I'm so sorry. Yeah, I don't know why you're not. Maybe you joined after we launched. I'm a mentor. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us. It's good to have that we have folks. You can leave and rejoin, but I don't think we're going to keep the Zoom polls until then. Okay, 66% of you voted, so I think we're going to stop there. Thank you so much, everyone, for voting. And let me end the poll and let me share it with everybody. Okay, so 45% of you are unemployed, 34% are doing a survival job, 10% are doing underemployment, and 10% are meaningfully employed. Lack of Canadian experience is the major challenge that folks are facing. Difficulty networking and building professional connections being the second one. A lot of you are very confident, which is excellent uh, in your current job search strategies. So that's good to hear. And I'm pretty sure you'll learn a lot from our guest speaker today as well. That would be adding to your confidence. Um, and some of the networking strategies are connecting with professionals on LinkedIn is the highest, 64%. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everybody, again. Um, And let me just stop this. Okay, excellent. So, Camara, again, thank you very much for joining us today. Take it over, and so we'll be Camara will be doing a presentation for about half an hour, and for the rest of the time, it will be for Q&A and discussion. And so, feel free to put your questions on the chat. I'll read them. I'll summarize them at the end, and we'll go from there. Camara, take it out.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm really excited to speak to you all. Thank you so much for coming to this session. I'm sure that you're going to learn lots and lots, and I'd love for this to be as interactive as possible. So I'm going to encourage you to use the chat box. If you have any questions at all while I'm speaking, please just put them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on them, and I'll pause every now and again to take questions, but we'll of course have lots of time at the end to do an Ask Me Anything, where you can literally ask me anything you'd like under the sun. So my name's Camara Chambers. My pronouns are she and her. And in my current role right now, I work at a really large downtown university in the heart of Toronto, called Toronto Metropolitan University. And I do work that's focused on leadership development. I have a team of amazing people. We do lots of work around different programs to build up people's leadership skills, but also get them excited and interested in community change, and really helping them to understand how they can influence the laws and the policies and the systems that impact our everyday lives. So I'm really excited to speak to you. I'm going to launch my PowerPoint right now. I prepared some slides just to give you a sense of really who I am and some of my top tips. Okay, so hopefully you can see that.
Yes.
Okay, amazing. So I'm going to be going over 10 tips to achieve success in a competitive job market. So I totally recognize that when you are job hunting, as many of you are currently, it can be frustrating and difficult and really scary when you don't have a sense of when you will finally land the job that pays you enough and is actually using your skills in a way that you want to use your skills. I have 100% been through this situation. And so I'm going to be sharing with you the tips that I found worked. I know that when I first started out, people were giving me all kinds of advice. Some of it worked and some of it really didn't. And so I'm really hoping that I can share some of my mistakes and things that I did wrong and things that went well, just so you can begin to think about your own journey and how to really try to survive and thrive in what can be a really competitive job market. Okay, so in terms of some facts about me, so firstly, oops, there we go. Firstly, I was born and raised in London, England. So I have Jamaican parents. My parents are from the east and the central part of Jamaica. But I was born in London, and I lived there until 2011. And so all of my schooling, or most of my schooling, took place in London. And for me, London was home. But I got to a point where I was really looking for a slower pace of life. And I wanted to move to a country that I felt I had a bit more opportunity. And so I chose to come to Canada, and I immigrated here in 2011. And at that point, I landed in Toronto. I really planned to only stay for 1 year, but 14 years later, I'm still here. So the Canadians can't get rid of me. I hope that I'm here to stay, at least for a while. And I've really settled into my life here in Canada. That said, it was not easy. So my first year, I maybe naively thought that I would be able to move and get a job relatively quickly. I had done a bit of research before I moved, and so I had a sense that Canadian experience matters. But by the time I moved, I had a degree from my home country, from England. I also felt quite privileged because I speak English. And I thought that because I had some experience and professional experience moving here, that I'd be able to get a job within a couple of weeks. It took me longer than expected, and quite quickly I realized that I had bills to pay and I had to survive, and I moved by myself. I had no family, I had no friends when I moved here. I really realized that to be able to survive, I was going to have to take any job I could get to make some money to pay my rent. And so for the first 6 months, I had a survival job. I was working in retail at Yonge and Dundas. So those of you who are based in Toronto, Yonge and Dundas is the heart of the city. And I spent those first 6 months in retail. For me, that was challenging and frustrating because it felt like a real step back. By the time I moved to Toronto, I already had maybe 4 or 5 years of experience under my belt. And so I was really disappointed. I think it was a real hit to my ego. But in many ways, I thought it was a really good, humbling experience. It reminded me of what it means just to start again, and what it means to really have to kind of take a few steps back before you're able to move forward. So I did that work for 6 months. And then during that time, I was frantically applying to as many jobs as I could, trying to understand how to break into the Canadian job market, how to adapt my resume in a way that Canadians would appreciate and understand. I didn't do much networking because I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to network. But eventually I found a job. And so I started working at Volunteer Toronto, which is a large volunteer centre in the heart of Toronto. And I spent 7 years there. So I will say that because it took me so long to get my first job, I was a little bit nervous about leaving. And so I stayed there for quite a long time because for me, it felt very secure. And so I stayed there for 7 years. I eventually worked my way up. And then before I left in 2017, I was executive director. So I became the executive director of the organization at 31 years old. It was really for me a long-term dream, something that I wanted to do eventually in my career. But I was really fortunate that I had the opportunity to get that position quite early on, much earlier than I would have expected. So that was my first foray into senior leadership and actually leading my own organization, a staff team of about 15 people. And while it was challenging, I learned a lot. I learned a ton of different things that really have carried me into my work today. But after a while, I realized that I wanted to move into the education sector. And so I applied for a job at Toronto Metropolitan University, and I've been there ever since. So my work currently has been in senior leadership in the university. I've managed a number of teams, a number of programs. I do a bit of fundraising, and I really enjoyed it. I've had a really fun time at the university. And then finally, from the day I moved to Toronto, I started volunteering. So I've been volunteering pretty much nonstop since then. And volunteering was such an important part of my journey. It helped me to build a network. It helped me to better understand Canada and Toronto and the city. It helped me to make friends and build a community. And eventually in 2021, I started my own nonprofit. So I'm really passionate about hiking. I hope I've got some hikers in the room, maybe. I really enjoy hiking. For me, it's something that brings me so much joy. I just love being outdoors. And while I hated it before I moved to Canada, it was one of my colleagues who invited me on a hike, and I absolutely loved it. And so I loved the hike so much that I chose to become a hike leader. I started leading my own hikes. And then a few years later, I decided that I wanted to start my own nonprofit focused on newcomers and diversity. And I wanted to make hiking a lot more inclusive for people who were new to the hiking community. And so I founded an organization called Let's Hike TO back then, and it's grown and grown since then. And over 2,000 Torontonians have come hiking with us. So if you like hiking, maybe check out Let's Hike TO. I'll drop the link in a moment into the chat box. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide. I'm also just going to check the chat to make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, I think we're good. I see 2 people have their hands raised. Do you have questions?
Yeah, Camara, we can just go ahead and
Keep
maybe
going.
I'll encourage folks to write their questions on the chat.
Okay, that sounds good. Okay, wonderful. So that's been my journey to Canada. For me, because I've had this experience of moving as a newcomer, many of my friends and community here are newcomers. I very much identify with the newcomer journey and the experience, and I know how challenging it can be. I think when you're not born and raised here, it can be really scary to leave your home country and then suddenly be in a new environment, a new culture, and having to learn the rules of the workplace all over again. And so I'm really hoping that these top tips are going to help you with your career journey and with you trying to find the job that you want in the field of your choice. Okay, so my very first tip is to reflect and set a realistic and specific career goal. So this was the first mistake I made when I moved to Canada. I knew I needed money. I knew I needed to work, so I had bills to pay. But if anyone was to ask me, what do you want to do, or what kind of job do you want, I didn't really have the words to articulate exactly what kind of work I was looking for. And I found that time and time again that worked against me, because sometimes I'd meet people who were really friendly and who wanted to support me, but I wasn't able to really articulate exactly what I was looking for. I knew that I wanted to work in the nonprofit sector. And I knew that I probably wanted to go in at a coordinator level because that was the type of work that I was doing in London. But I really wasn't sure of anything else. I hadn't really thought about what issues I felt passionately about, or even how much money I wanted to make. I was trying to be really flexible, but in the process, I wasn't very clear with what I actually wanted. So my first tip to you is to be reflective and give yourself some time to think about what is it that you're looking for. So what kind of job are you looking for? If you can articulate the position title or the type of industry you want to work for, or the type of company you want to work for, that's really important. And once you figure that out for yourself, it's really important to be able to say in a sentence or two, if anyone asks you, exactly the type of role you're looking for. So nowadays, if I were to say what kind of work I want to go into, I would say I'm looking for a director level role at a university or a college that specifically has a strong focus in community engagement and team leadership. That's a quick overview of what my skill set is nowadays. But I think it's important for you to begin to develop the skills to be able to clearly articulate what you want. And the reason is because if you can tell people what you want, they can then begin to help you. Okay. The next tip I have is again one that I made a huge mistake with. So when I moved here, as I mentioned, people kept telling me to network. People kept telling me that the Canadian job market is hidden. I didn't know what that meant, but it was hidden. And I needed to somehow build my network and meet people in order to begin to find job opportunities. The challenge was when I moved, I didn't know anyone. And then, like I said, I couldn't articulate exactly what I was looking for. So I found it really challenging to network. There were 1 or 2 people who I was introduced to through people that I knew back home in London, but I found that they were in different industries and they couldn't really support me because I was in a different area or a different industry. And so the one thing that I've learned that is incredibly helpful that I would advise to anyone is to approach your job search with a sense of curiosity. And what I mean by that is rather than thinking of networking as going to events and meeting people and trying to talk about yourself, which can be very uncomfortable, particularly if you're an introvert like I am, it can be very difficult. the thing that I recommend is trying to use the technique of coffee chats as a way of meeting new people and people who work in the industry that you're interested in and in the jobs that you're interested in. So hopefully you've heard of this phrase, coffee chats. It's also known as informational interviews. And basically it's a tactic of reaching out to people who you probably don't know, who work in the right industry, to ask them whether they would be interested in having a short chat with you. So that chat can take place in person or it can take place virtually, but basically you're asking for some of their time, usually about 15 or 20 minutes of their time. And then you, hopefully when they say yes, when you reach out to them, you basically ask them questions about their career and the job market. And I found that if you're able to reach out to someone and they say yes, often they're able to give you invaluable advice that you would never have understood or never have had access to otherwise. And so I think approaching your job search with a curiosity that guides you to having one-on-one conversations with people can be so effective and a really quick and easy way of understanding your industry, but also some of the skills that are needed in your industry. So what I'm going to do before I move on is I'd actually just like to pause and show you a video, because this video for me is the clearest and easiest way to explain what informational interviewing is and what coffee chats are. So just bear with me and I'll get this video up. Okay, let me just check to make sure that you'll be able to hear this.
Are you sharing?
Yes, just 1 second. Okay.
Yeah, when you share it, make sure you include
The sound.
something to do with sound, include sound,
Yes.
something like that.
1 second.
Yeah, you can hear it now.
You could hear that? Great.
Yeah.
An informational interview is an amazingly powerful
We
tool.
can't see it though.
It can help you learn about different types of work.
Oh, okay, 1 second. Let me do that
We
again.
can hear it, but we can't see it.
Okay, hold on. Okay, this should be better now.
And now we can see it, but we can't hear it.
Sorry, you can't hear it now?
No, no sound now.
Okay, hold on 1 second. I'm going to try
When you
something.
share your screen, there's a checkbox you need to check. It says include sound or something like
Okay, I'm going to try this one more time.
that. Okay.
Hold on. Can you hear it now?
Different types of work you're interested in.
Yeah.
By providing inside perspective, it will make
Yes?
Yeah, you can see it and hear it.
Okay, wonderful. Start again then.
an informational interview is an amazingly powerful tool. It can help you learn about different types of work you're interested in. And by providing inside perspective, it may even connect you to opportunities you couldn't see from the outside. So let's take a look at what informational interviewing is all about. An informational interview is not a job interview, and it's not a tricky play to get a job. If you're asking for a job and they do have one, then they'll likely start judging whether you're a good fit. And if they don't have one, then that conversation ends there. The key to a successful informational interview is curiosity. With sincere curiosity and good questions about your interviewee's life and experience, you gain insights into their successes and failures, how they got where they are, and what's important to them. Your curiosity will lead to an authentically engaged conversation, which also opens the door for the interviewee to get curious about you. The professional you're speaking with might say something like, "Wow, you're asking some really good questions." And in that transition, informational interviewing becomes even more valuable for someone looking for work. Informational interviews give you an opportunity to see what kinds of work resonate with you and help you determine what communities you would like to be a part of. In a good informational interview, the professional you speak with gets a lot out of the conversation too. They get to discuss their life and their work with someone who's curious about their experience and values their expertise. Plus, they get the pleasure of talking with someone who's genuinely interested in what they do. How do you do it well? Here are 5 tips to get you started. First, do your homework. Take some time to research LinkedIn or other online platforms to learn about the professional you're interviewing. Consider what questions you have about their life and work. The second tip is to try to meet in person. On the phone is okay, but face-to-face is best. 3, always try to buy the coffee or lunch. Your interviewee is giving you their time. Paying is a good way of showing your appreciation and beginning to create a connection. 4, ask your interviewee who else they recommend you talk with. If the interview has gone well, they may be willing to connect you to other professionals you can learn from and who might have opportunities for you. Finally, tip number 5, after the interview, send a thank you. Email is okay, but a handwritten note is even better. And if they ask you to keep them posted on your progress, do so.
Okay, so that is a very quick overview of informational interviews, how to do it, why to do it, and what they can really, what they can do when you go through that process, the impact that they can have. And so, like I mentioned, this was something that I did not learn about probably until way into my time here in Canada. But if I could have done this all over again, I would have started there. Rather than trying to go to networking events or trying to just randomly network with people as and when I could, I would have started by doing some real thinking about the job I wanted, creating that specific and realistic goal. I would have then gone on LinkedIn and done some research or researched different companies in the industry that I wanted to work in, and then found people who are working in those fields and reached out to them and sent them a very polite and well-tailored message, telling them why I was reaching out to them specifically, and that I was hoping to meet with them for maybe 15 or 20 minutes for a quick coffee or a virtual call. Virtual is fine. And then I would have prepared myself by asking them some really useful questions. So I would have asked them things like, what are some skills in this industry that are rare, that would be important for potential job seekers to have? Or what do you recommend as a newcomer for me to do to set my resume apart? Or how did you get into this field? What do you like most about your job? What don't you like most about your job? Where do you hope to be in the future, in the next 10 years? I'd ask questions like that. I think if you do some Googling, you'll see there are lots of different articles of different questions that you can ask. The most important thing is to, one, be flexible and make it easy for them to say yes to meeting you. So if you can, if you're meeting them in person, go to where they are. And then also just be prepared. So you don't really want to get there and then expect them to lead the conversation. Because you're the one who said that you want to meet with them, it's important that you are prepared to have the conversation. So that's important. And then finally, if you can, ask them, is there anyone else that you recommend that I can speak to? And then follow up with a thank you. The thank you is really important. Okay. So I would use that as my main tactic in terms of trying to better understand the job market and network, as well as applying to jobs that I would be seeing online as well. Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay, the other thing that I would say, tip number 3, would be to get some honest and blunt feedback. So this is something that I didn't ask enough of when I first started out my career, particularly when I was here in Canada. But I realized quite quickly that there were things that I was doing that was sabotaging my job search. So my resume was not adapted to be a Canadian standard format. In England, we call resumes CVs, and they look a little bit differently. And so it took a while before I asked someone for feedback on my resume. And when they did give me feedback, there were a ton of things that I was doing that I shouldn't have. So I think I had like references available on request on my resume. I had put my high school information on my resume that wasn't relevant. I had, on my resume, I didn't put enough action statements. I just put what I'd done at each job, but I didn't specifically talk about my accomplishments at each place that I worked. So those were just a few of the things that I was doing wrong that I could have figured out if I'd asked someone for feedback sooner. But the other thing was there were things about the way that I presented myself that were also holding me back. So one of the things that I realized quite quickly when I moved here was that I speak really fast. And I think that's just the Londoner in me. But I found that sometimes I spoke so fast that Canadians couldn't understand what I was saying. And so that was feedback that I received that made me realize that I had to adapt the way I speak to begin to give myself a better shot when I was applying for the jobs that I was applying for. And so those are just a couple of examples, but there may well be things that you may be doing that could be hurting your job chances. I'll give you an example. Just recently, in the past 3 weeks, I've hired 25 staff. And some of the things that I've seen that have been, major mistakes that have meant that I've chosen not to shortlist them. They have had lots of typos in their email. So they haven't tried, even if they maybe aren't the strongest at spelling and grammar, which is completely fine, they haven't used any kind of tool or spell check before they send in their resume. Sometimes they've clearly sent me a resume that is not at all tailored to the job that I'm hiring for. So I can't in any way see how what they've done fits with what I'm looking for. I need to be able to see that match, and they haven't made that easy for me. Sometimes people do odd things, like they don't capitalize the first letters of their first and last name, which is something that's very standard and common here, but people don't do that, which means, again, I'd wonder about their attention to detail. Other times in the application form I just recently used, I asked people to submit a video. Probably about 30% of people who applied did not submit a video, even though that was necessary. And so automatically they were disqualified from the process. Or other people submitted a video, but clearly had not prepared at all. So they didn't seem like they put much effort or thought into how they were going to present themselves on screen. And so these are all the things that I was looking for that would show me a sense of who they were, how prepared they were, how diligent they were, how hardworking and how strong their attention to detail was. But based on how they presented themselves, I started to wonder whether they would be a good fit for the role, and I was more likely to go for people who did present themselves a lot better. So the big thing I say here is just ask for feedback. Ask for feedback from people who know you, from people maybe who you volunteer with. If you're doing a part-time job or a full-time job currently, ask for feedback from your current boss. Ask for feedback as much as you can, and encourage people to be blunt. Ask people to be honest. I sometimes think that in Canada, there is a hesitancy to be really honest. I think people are uncomfortable being honest, if I'm honest. But I think it's important to know how you come across. If you don't know that, then you can't correct yourself. So begin asking for honest and blunt feedback. And I think what I would suggest, there's a feedback method that I really like. I'm just going to drop into the chat box. It's called Start, Stop, Continue. Actually, I'm not sure if I can drop it into the, oh yes, I can. Okay, here we go. Okay. So I'll just drop this here, and it's a way of asking for feedback where you say to the person, what do you think I should start doing? What do you think I should stop doing? What do you think I should continue doing? So the start are things that you should be doing more proactively that you're not doing currently. What should I stop doing? So those are the things that are sabotaging you or hurting you. And then what should I continue doing? So those are the things that you're already doing amazingly at, that the person is saying, you're doing great there, keep doing that. Okay, so that's a way of asking for feedback. And I think when you ask someone to give you feedback in that format, it ends up being much more specific than if you just say, what do you think of me? How can I be better? Okay, tip number 4 is find joy outside your job hunt. So I will say I did this from day one. I quite quickly realized that I didn't want to spend all of my time at my computer job hunting because I'd find that pretty depressing. And so quite quickly, I started to think about the various ways that I could bring joy into my life when I wasn't looking for jobs. So I like to read. So I would go to the library on a regular basis. I didn't have much money, so I couldn't afford to buy books, but I could afford to walk to the library and I would read books basically. And that was really fun for me. I would sometimes go to events at the library because I wasn't working 9 to 5, I had a bit more time. And so I was able to go to events I usually wouldn't have gone to. I really, as I mentioned, love hiking. And so I started doing more walks, going out into nature as a way to try to keep myself a bit more, feeling more positive about life and everything that was happening. Okay, sorry about that. So those are the things that I did. And I also tried to surround myself with people who were positive people. So people who also were feeling like positive and hopeful about their job hunts, just because I wanted to make sure that I had kind of good positive energy around me and people who were inspiring to me, rather than surrounding myself with maybe people who were a bit more negative or a bit more pessimistic about the job search process. So whatever that looks like, whatever brings you joy, maybe it's food or cooking or exercise or whatever it might be, make sure you lean into those activities because you'll need to keep fueling yourself to keep going. Find communities of other job seekers. So this for me was really important because sometimes I found that if I were just working at home on my laptop trying to find jobs, I'd find myself procrastinating or I'd feel a bit demotivated. And so I quickly realized that if I were able to find other people who are job hunting, we could basically create groups, or I could basically be in more spaces where I felt more motivated to continue my job search. So I had a friend who was job searching at the same time, and she and I would meet up at Tim Hortons once a week, and we'd spend a couple of hours just sitting there, having a coffee, and basically job hunting together. For me, that was really helpful and just a really good way of keeping me motivated. And she was able to act as an accountability partner for me. So I made a commitment of how many jobs I wanted to apply for each week, and she did the same. And then we'd ask each other, how is that going? How many of you applied for? Have you heard back from that one job that you were really excited by? How many coffee chats have you booked so far this week? So that's just something that I recommend doing as a way to keep yourself not only motivated, but keep yourself on track with whatever targets you've set for yourself. Celebrate the wins. So this is a process, it's a journey. It sometimes can be longer than you expect, but make sure you celebrate the wins as they happen. So those wins might be being invited for a telephone interview, or maybe an employer saying, I'm sorry, we filled the job, but your resume impressed us, so we're going to keep it on file and we'd like to contact you in the future. Or maybe it's getting an in-person interview. Maybe it's getting a second round interview. Maybe it's even getting to the point of almost getting the job, but then not getting it. As you go further and further in the job process, the job search process, celebrate all of those wins. Maybe it's someone saying yes to having coffee with you who you thought might never respond to your email. So just try to see the positive in it, because it can be a long process. It's important to feel that each step is a step forward in the right direction. This is really important and something that I didn't pay enough attention to, and I sometimes see others make the same mistake, which is pay attention to where in the job search process you are getting stuck. So what I mean by that is typically you'll see a job online or you'll hear about a job, you will send in your resume and cover letter for it. At that point, you may or may not hear back. Maybe you do hear back, and maybe you're invited to a first round interview. And then at that point, you may or may not get the job. And then often there's usually a second round interview. And then at that point, you may or may not get the job. And then eventually if you do get the job, you'll get to the job offer stage where they offer you the job formally. What I've noticed is that if you pay attention to that process, you may realize that there's one part of the process that you're not getting past. So maybe you're sending out loads of resumes and cover letters and not hearing anything back. So you're not even getting interviews. If that's happening, that tells you one thing. There is something about your resume and cover letter that is not working for employers. So you should take some time to review it or get some feedback on it to ensure that it's the best that it can be. Okay, so if you're not getting interviews, that shows you that something's wrong with how you're applying. If you're getting interviews, but you're not getting to the job offer stage, that shows you that there's something wrong with how you're interviewing. Hopefully, when you interview, you should always ask for feedback, particularly if you don't get the job, just because then you can learn what you can do better. But if you're finding that after interviews, you're not hearing back or they're saying no, there's something about how you're interviewing that could be the problem. And again, that's where you'd want to get feedback. You'd want to ask someone for advice. You might even want to do some mock interview practice with someone who you trust. Okay. So it's really important to have a look at the process and think, where is it that I'm getting stuck? Where can I get some help and support? Tip number 8, this is a really important one. I often do training and advice giving to students who are looking for their first job. And this is one that they struggle with, but it's such an important one. It's quality over quantity. So what I mean by that is when you're looking for jobs and you're considering which ones you apply to, it's absolutely crucial that you take your time and write a strong cover letter and resume and put in a really great application to fewer jobs, that rather than sending the same resume and cover letter out to hundreds and hundreds of jobs. Your chances of success will be much higher if you are a bit more targeted and thoughtful, and you spend a bit more time preparing your application rather than preparing your application and sending them to few organizations rather than using the same application and sending it to hundreds of organizations. This is incredibly important. It's something I think people forget, or they maybe don't have patience for. But the reality is, as someone who does a lot of hiring myself, if someone has just sent you their application and hasn't tailored it in any way, it's likely there's no reason why I would ask them to come in for an interview, because I can't see how what they have is what I'm looking for. You need to make it really easy for the employer. Which goes nicely to tip number 9, give the employer what they want. So the easiest way of doing this is looking at the job description, reading what they're looking for, looking at your resume, so knowing what skills you have, and then as best as possible, mirroring or matching the words that they're using in the job description on your resume, and talking specifically about the skills that they're looking for in your resume. That also means, though, looking at your resume and taking out experiences or tasks or skills that are simply not relevant. Because when you include things that aren't relevant, it then can make an employer feel a bit confused about what your focus is, and they can quite quickly lose interest. And so if you know, for instance, you're applying for a role that involves community engagement, maybe you're a community engagement coordinator, or that's a role that you're applying for, but you've maybe got experience doing something like coding, or maybe something that's more numerical, maybe accounting. If those skills are in no way relevant to the job, I wouldn't let's say put them on your resume, or if you do put them on your resume, put very little detail, because the employer won't be as interested in that as they might be in any other experience that you have related directly to community engagement and community outreach. Okay, so that's incredibly important. Try to tailor your resume to every single job you apply for, and your cover letter should be tailored, so you tell the employer why you're interested in working specifically for that company. And then finally, tip number 10 is to simply be patient. This is an incredibly hard one. I think the scariest thing about the job hunt for me was I didn't know when it would end. I didn't know how long it would take. I didn't know if it was going to take 6 months or 2 years or 5 years. And so I was able to survive because I had that retail job. But I also found it really disheartening to just not know when I was going to land a job. I think it was about 2 weeks before I got the job offer at Volunteer Toronto. I was working in my retail job, making minimum wage, and my boss shouted at me about 3 times in 1 hour. And she shouted at me for things that weren't really my fault, but she was angry and she shouted at me. And I remember leaving the store and I went out onto the street and I just cried. And I spent 15 minutes crying. And I remember thinking, I didn't move here for this experience. I didn't choose to come to Canada so I could be in this random job I didn't really want, making very, very little money that was barely covering my rent. to then be shouted at by someone for doing things I wasn't doing. And so at that point, I hit rock bottom and I was really frustrated. I composed myself, wiped the tears away, and eventually went back in the store and continued my job. But for me, it was a reminder that there are definitely low points in the job search process, and you never know when the ups are going to be. Thankfully, it was only, I think, like a week later that I got a call from Volunteer Toronto and they offered me the job, and then I was there for 7 years. But at that point, I didn't see any more opportunity. And so just know that those tough times come. The most important thing isn't the number of times that you fall, it's the number of times that you stand back up. That was one of my favorite sayings to remember during the job search process. Falling is inevitable, it happens, but you have to be able to pick yourself up. And so I think just practicing that as best as possible and just knowing that you will land the right job, it just takes time and it just takes a lot of patience. And in the meantime, try to surround yourself with people who you like, people who are part of your community, people who bring you joy. Okay, I'm going to pause there. We'll go to the Ask Me Anything.
Excellent. Camara, thank you very much. Those are incredibly important tips, everyone. I hope you are taking some notes. I'll be sharing the recording, and if Camara allows us, a copy of the slides as well. But again, there were more details to the slides, so I really hope that you are taking notes. I came myself as a newcomer in 2016. If I had all those 10 tips in 2016, my career progress would not be delayed, as much as it was. And so really, really, really important tips. I hope you take advantage of that. So we will feel free to raise your hands. We will open for Q&A. But until you do that, I have a quick question that I would ask to Camara. So, I can relate to a lot of the personal examples that you were using, and working at Jumpstart for the past 3 years and speaking with hundreds and hundreds of people. I can also identify a few of the mistakes that you say don't do it, a lot of clients doing. And so one question, personal question, and then a question on some of the tips that you give. So you said you were going to Tim Hortons, speaking with a friend, applying for jobs together. You talked about quality over quantity. You talked about being detail oriented, making sure you're not making mistakes and things like that. So keeping that in mind, how many job applications in a week do you suggest? Because if you're going to focus on those things, if you're going to study the employer, if you're going to be very detail oriented, if you're going to ask somebody to look at your application before you submit them, how many applications per day do you suggest? Because the number of applications that clients tell me they apply per day and per week, you'll be surprised.
How many are people applying for in a day or week?
People tell me I've applied 120 for the past month, 80 in the past 2 weeks, 50. Yeah.
I don't even know how that's possible. I don't which field has 80 jobs currently available. But what I would say is for me, a job application takes like about 3 hours to do. So that is me reading through the application, doing my research on the company, comparing what they're looking for to what I can offer, and then adapting my resume and cover letter. I got it down to 2 hours with the help of ChatGPT, which someone's asked about that. I'll talk about that in a second. But even then, it's still me editing. It's still me going through every single line. It's still me personalizing it, making it seem special to that employer. So I could probably apply for no more than about two or three a day. So at most, if I was working every single day to do this, and most, like, I guess 21 a week, most, I would probably say 10 a week would be the max I could probably do.
And that's considering, English is the first language. If somebody
English
is a second language.
And that's with, as well, my experience working in career development and recruitment and all of that stuff. For other people, it should and would take longer. You need to take your time. And the thing is, employers can tell if you've tried or if you've just thrown in an application, because they're reviewing hundreds of people. I think, I don't even know how many applications I had to review in the past 3 weeks. I probably reviewed about 300 applications. And it takes, I do it in about 10 seconds. So it's a quick review through. But it has to be strong from the moment you look at it, and it has to be adapted to what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And the second point that I struggle a lot of, that I see a lot of clients struggling with is the action statements that you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. So if you could talk a little bit about that, maybe if you could use in some examples, because majority of people, they just list the duties they had, I prepare presentations, right? So
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about the action statements as opposed to what they did?
Yeah, so action statements, this is a new thing, newish, probably the past couple of years. The whole idea behind it is that rather than in your resume just saying what you did, you say what you did well. So what did you thrive in? Like, what did you do to make the organization better, to improve their processes, to save them money? They're not the easiest to write because you have to do a lot of reflection. You have to take yourself back in your mind and think back when I was working at that job, what did I do amazingly well at? And then once you figure that out, it's a case of trying to write it in a way that is accomplishment focused. So typically I like to talk about it. So in the base level is to just say what you did well without providing any numbers or stats. So to say something like when I worked in England, I wrote a report that was published, and then the Minister of Education read it and praised it. So I said that in my resume. Or another example is when I worked at Volunteer Toronto, I increased their nonprofit community network by about 40% in like the first few months I was there. But to figure out that stats, I had to go back and remember approximately how many nonprofits were part of it when I started, how many at the 3-month mark, and then I just did the calculations. So it just takes some reflection. One thing that I will add in the chat box, there's a really great website called muse.com. So I'm going to drop in an article which is about how to turn resume duties into accomplishments. So have a read through that. That's probably a better and more thorough explanation. But in short, you're trying to say, yeah, how did you make something more efficient? How did something result in positive customer complaints, positive customer feedback, less customer complaints? Maybe your boss just praised it. Maybe you saved the organization money. Anything like that can be helpful.
Maybe a word of compliments your boss gave you.
Compliments.
Yeah.
Or maybe you were the first, maybe you were chosen as the first to do something. Maybe you're promoted in a really short space of time, stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Let's see. We have one person raising their hand, but you mentioned there are some questions on the chat as well. Do you want to go ahead and maybe address the ChatGPT question?
Okay, the ChatGPT question. So I think someone said, where is it? Do you think if we get the help from ChatGPT to customize our resume and cover letter, it's okay? As looking for a job, it's like a full-time job already. That is true. Spending hours per day to apply for a job. Yes, I agree. It is like a full-time job. You can use ChatGPT, but only use it as a starting point, because you have to edit it. You must edit it. You can't just say to ChatGPT, here's this job, here's my resume, make my resume match this job. It's not going to work. I'll tell you that for now, because ChatGPT is only as good as the information you give it. And when it doesn't know information, it either makes it up. So sometimes it's factually incorrect, which I've noticed before. But also sometimes it has an ability to be really vague and to use words in English that most people don't use. Employers can definitely tell when you've used ChatGPT. So again, when I was going through his resumes, I could tell who used ChatGPT. So if you do use it as a starting place, as a bit of like an inspiration, and then take that information and then make it your own. So edit it as you want to, based on your own judgment, but don't use it as just a simple tool. Yeah.
Thank you. And there's another question. Do you think, I think that was the ChatGPT. So what are some courses and certifications that are highly valued by Canadian employers? and how can they help job seeker stand out? So I
And
guess
then that question is fully dependent on the industry and the type of work you do. It
I think they
all
meant maybe like a soft skill training.
soft skills. Okay,
Yeah.
soft skills, great communication skills, crucial. If you have the ability to articulate yourself well, particularly if you have the ability to explain complex ideas or theories in a very simple way, that's often valued because that's helpful. In most jobs these days, strong tech skills, so the ability to use a laptop, the ability to type, the ability to use email, maybe like Microsoft Office, PowerPoint, that kind of thing. That's not soft skill, but that's more like I do think that's helpful. I think the ability to get on well with other people, which sounds very fluffy, but the ability to work well in a team, to walk into an office space and to be able to build rapport and connection with people and have the confidence to do so, I think is something that most employers would really value. Often they say that if you're offered an interview, that means they've looked at your resume and cover letter and they think you're strong enough to do the job. The interview is just whether or not they like you as a person and want to work with you. And so just remember that when it comes to an interview, as well as trying to explain to the employer why you're a good fit, you should also think about how you can share your personality. Smile, maybe share a bit about who you are as a person. So just I think trying to find ways to connect with the employer is really helpful in interviews. Even asking how they are and thinking about the questions you ask at the end of an interview, which is actually, this is where I see most people mess up when it comes to interviews. At the end, the question, do you have any questions for us? You should always have questions for them. My favorite question to ask them, because it gets them talking about themselves, and everyone loves to talk about themselves, is so I've looked up online about your career history. It's been really interesting. How did your career journey lead you to where you are today? And then the person will often be like, well, I studied here, and then I did this, and then I did this, and I eventually did this, and then I ended up working here. And it's an opportunity for them to tell you their story. But there are other like practical questions you might ask, like, how would you describe the work culture here? What would you say is the hardest challenge? What would be the hardest challenge in the first 3 months of this job? How would you describe the team environment here? Those types of questions are really important, but always be prepared with questions. So yeah, those
something. Sorry, go on. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I just meant so ask something that would leave a good impression. Show them a positive attitude and ask a question that would stick with them so that when they do the evaluation, you'll stand out. They'll remember you easily.
Yeah, don't ask questions about the money, how many vacation days you get, how much you get to work from home. Don't ask anything like that, because you can talk about those details once they're sure they want you. But at the point where they're still judging you against other people, you want to use questions that will show them the type of person you are, but show them that you've put some thought into this process.
Yeah. But maybe also ask about professional development so that they can see
that's a great one.
You're eager to learn, and continuous learning is a value that you carry on.
Yeah, that's a perfect one.
Excellent. And then there is I think Martinez, not sure if you're sharing your experiences or there is a question there, but it says, I always made a brief 10-page presentation PowerPoint covering my background, my plan with the company. I got hired, and volunteering gym. Let me see if there's a question there. But sometimes people are scared that might not staying permanently for the job and just using the. Okay, so yeah, I think this is there's a really good point there. So a lot of clients struggle with being considered as overqualified.
Yeah.
So if you're somebody with international experience, you kind of lose the confidence to apply for positions that match your experience. So you apply for a position that's entry level, and how do you deal with that? Would the employer think, this is really overqualified, they're not going to stay in this job, and they would hire somebody maybe in a lower position, thinking that they're going to stay longer? Like, how do you deal with that on your application?
Okay, so if you're applying for a job that you know you are overqualified for, if I were you, I wouldn't put all my experience on there. I would like maybe scale back how much experience I put. So it's not completely obvious to them that you are overqualified. And then I would make it clear in my cover letter why I was going for this role, even though it was maybe more junior than my resume suggests. So I'd maybe say that I'm specifically looking to take a more junior role so I can learn more about the Canadian industry, the Canadian work culture, et cetera, et cetera. And then if you got to the job interview stage, again, I'd be ready to explain that. I'd be ready to articulate why. I have, I think, 2 or 3 times in my career gone backwards. So I've taken jobs that are more junior than my experience level. The question always comes up because they see you as a flight risk, which basically means they're scared you're going to leave really quickly. And so I've always had specific reasons why. I've always been like for instance, when I went to TMU, I went from executive director to manager or senior manager. And so I was able to say, it's been my long-term dream to work in post-secondary education. I know that I need to take a few steps back because it's unlikely to be able to move directly. I am very committed to working at this organization long-term. You can see that from my job history. I don't jump around much, and that's why I'm keen. Or sometimes you might explain something like, maybe you've got a lot going on in your family life or something. There's a reason why you're trying to take a job that is a little bit less, like a little bit more junior than a job that you actually qualified for. I'd say be prepared to answer that in a way that is honest. The 10-page presentation is unusual. I don't know how you bring that up in an interview. I don't think it's necessary, and I think it might put an interviewer off, if I'm honest. I wouldn't spend time preparing that presentation. If it's just an unusual tactic that I think could be seen as a little bit odd, if I'm honest. But I think instead, when you get a job interview, you should think to yourself, and this is where ChatGPT can help you, like putting in the job description in ChatGPT and saying, what are the questions I'm most likely to be asked? And then making sure you're practicing how you'd answer those questions. Usually from a job description, you can guess what they're going to ask you. Based on the skills that they list, they're probably going to ask you questions related to skills. And then so it's important to have answers ready as a result.
Yeah. Okay, and so Tahmina is asking about finding a job without a referral. So I know a lot of newcomers, because they don't have experience, they don't have connection. Maybe there's a challenge in finding referrals. And we've had at Jumpstart somebody making a huge mistake of providing inaccurate information about a referral. So essentially, they got the job, but then the employer found out that the referral didn't exist. They lost that job because of that.
So sorry, they told they told the employer that someone had referred them. They just made it up.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
I think, so again, that's, the whole presentation, Tahmina, was about really for that, connection, so I think, creating connection, finding a way to connect with it in the industry. So we'll share the slides. There are plenty of tips that could be helpful. Okay, we have 2 people raising their hands, so I'm going to give you a chance to Omar.
Okay, and then I'm going to go back to the questions in the chat because I realize there are a lot of them we haven't answered. So I'll go through.
We'll go back to
and
that.
answer them
Just
one
want
by one.
to make sure that we're not using only the
Being
chat.
equal.
Let me. Okay. Omar, you should be able to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Hi, Camara, thank you so much for your insightful presentation. I learned a lot. My question, you mentioned about asking people for a coffee chat.
Yes.
I wanted to ask, what are some effective ways and proper way, I would say, to ask people, and who is the right person to ask, and when is the right person? Is it like, are we gonna ask them at the first time that we meet them, or it's someone that we have had the pleasure of meeting in person? So if you can talk a little bit of this, and also about you mentioned about migrating to Canada from the UK. So if you can mention like any surprising or different thing about the Canadian job market that when you came to Canada you encountered. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Those are great questions. I'll answer the second question first. So differences between the Canadian and UK job market. First one, well, I think this has changed legally just recently, but in England, people put the salary typically in the job position. So when you're applying for a job, you usually know upfront how much they were likely to pay you. I found it very stressful here not to have that information because I didn't know enough about what I was worth. So I found it I struggled a lot to really truly understand how much I could demand. And I think as a result, I was underpaid probably for the first 7 years of my career because of that. But I think that was a big one. I think in England, there is a sense, there's a sense of more formality when it comes to how people write and articulate themselves in writing and in emails. Whereas here it's much more casual and relaxed, even in corporate settings. So that was a big change. In England, there isn't really as much a hidden job market. So, I think there's a stat. I don't even know if I believe the stat, but they say something like 70% of jobs are in the hidden job market. So they're not actually advertised. That doesn't really exist in England. Often when you're hiring someone, you will put it out into the public onto a job page like Indeed, rather than just going for someone that you know. So that one's big. I think those are the big ones. I also might say that there are certain fields over here that are highly sought after that aren't in England. So, and vice versa. So like over here, like there's lots of interest in being social workers and being teachers and working in local government. Those positions aren't really sought after in England, and actually the British government struggles a lot to find people who want to be social workers and teachers. So there's definitely differences in terms of what's in demand and what's not. In terms of doing outreach to find people to do informational interviews with, my biggest tool has always been LinkedIn. So what I typically do is I will firstly think of the company or do some research on the company that I want to work for. And then I'll go to LinkedIn and I'll look at their employee page. And then I'll either try and find someone, like in the ideal situation, you would go for someone who is one level above the role that you want to come in at, because that person will likely do the hiring whenever they hire for the positions. So if I wanted to be a manager, I'd ask someone who's a director for a coffee chat. Or if I want to be a coordinator, I'd ask someone who's a manager for a coffee chat. And then I would basically send them a LinkedIn request or a message. And I'd say in LinkedIn, you only have a certain number of characters, so you have to be quick. But I would say something like, I'm looking to move into like X field. I recently moved. I came across your profile. I was particularly interested by X, Y, Z. Like you have to be specific. They're not going to say yes if it looks like you sent this message to 200 people. They'll only say yes if you say something like, I noticed you used to work at Walmart or Canadian Tire or wherever it is they used to work. And I'm particularly interested in that. And I would love to spend just 15 minutes of your time asking you a few questions to learn more about your career journey. That's basically it. And then hopefully they say yes. So I always assume that I've never met them before. If you have met them, it's going to be way easier for them to say yes, because hopefully they've met you and they've got a good impression of you. And then it's just a case of following up and asking for coffee to have a bit more of a detailed chat. Yeah.
So for example, if you went to job fair, you met them there, and then you follow them on LinkedIn, then it's easy to say, hey, I met you at this event. I was really inspired by, when you said 1, 2, 3, and I want to learn more about it. So yeah, but otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would say about that is I feel like people who work in HR are probably less likely to say yes because they have lots of people asking them this. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't ask this of a recruiter or someone who's an HR person. Yeah, I just think that they'll say no. And then I just want to give you again like another resource. So this is the Muse's page on informational interviews, and they have a step by step, but they also have an example message to send. Mm-hmm. So you can just copy that and adapt it.
So everyone, make sure you click on those resources so that you don't lose them, so that you have them open on your browser. Okay. Um, Abdul Argoshi, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it right. Go ahead and unmute yourself. You're unmute. You are unmute. Can you say something again?
I'm sorry, I don't have a question. It was a mistakenly raised my
Oh,
hand.
okay. No
Yeah,
worries. All
sorry.
good.
Okay,
All good.
thank
No
you.
worries.
Dawit, can I start from the top of the chat and just go through the questions quickly?
Totally. Yeah.
Because
Yes.
I'm conscious, I'm sure I've missed some.
We missed a few in the chat.
There's someone who's mentioned, I think maybe Nakisha, who said that they have a degree in aviation from their home country. They haven't been successful in attaining a job in that field. Canadian employers prefer people who have trained aviation engineering degrees here. That you're self-studying for the license. You really don't want to go back to school. Yeah, that's tricky. There are certain professions where the reality is if you want to become qualified or certified here, you do have to do more studying. I studied law as my degree, at university. That's what my educational background. If I wanted to be a lawyer in Canada, there's really no way that I could do that unless I did additional training or additional exams. And so sometimes that's just the reality. If you are really against going back to school, or if for some reason your self-study route doesn't work out, you might look into alternative careers that are in that field, but maybe not as regulated. You could always do that. But I think that's always a difficult challenge. It's kind of a question you have to ask yourself. To what extent do I want to be doing exactly the same thing as I was doing back home? Am I willing to go back and study? I hope it goes well for you, though.
Yeah.
We spoke about ChatGPT. We spoke about courses. Frank, your question around how you can use ChatGPT. There are some prompts that you can give it to make it useful. I've got a prompt I think is really amazing. I'm hesitant to share it though, because again, if you use it, you have to tailor it yourself. Maybe I'll add it in. I think I'm going to add to the slide deck some of the resources that I've shared. I'll share with you the prompt, but please promise me you'll only use it if you then edit and tailor it. Okay, don't just use the information the ChatGPT spits out. Okay, Hugo, I don't know what your question is. You said, can you share your exposition? I'm not sure what you mean by exposition, but if you have more information, please include that. In terms of getting a job without a referral, it's definitely possible. Referrals help, but they're not the end all and be all. So I think it's definitely possible. I think having a strong resume and cover letter is more important than a referral, to be honest. Yeah. Okay, background in supply chain. Yep, that's a really interesting area. 1 year in Canada. Okay. So Frank, I'm guessing you want to go back into supply chain.
From property management, yeah.
Or property management? Or
well, he's doing property management.
He's doing property management now.
Yeah.
I think you'll need to find out what's necessary and what's being sought after in supply chain management. One way you might want to look into doing this is that program, that course is often taught at colleges and universities. And I've met professors who are really passionate about it and often give job advice around it. You could try reaching out to a professor or an instructor to ask them their thoughts and their advice in terms of how to pivot. Even though you're not a student at that college or university, they may be willing to provide some kind of free advice to you. So that's something to consider.
You're right. I think a lot of newcomers do not take advantage of the career counselors, the career advisors in the college. So, when I meet with people, I really encourage somebody to go and not even, not going only to one college, go to multiple colleges, go to universities, hear multiple opinions and decide.
Yeah, 100%. If you're at a college or university, part of your fees are paying for those services. So use them as much as you can. A lot of the colleges and universities say that you can keep going to their career services up to like 5 years, 10 years after you graduate. So make the most of them. Some won't give you advice unless you're actually a current student, but there's no harm asking. So yeah, if you're currently a student, definitely make the most of that. There's a question about how many pages should a resume ideally be. I'd say 2 to 3 max. I wouldn't go any further. If you're maybe older and you've got tons of experience, then you're going to have to be selective about which experiences you take out or how much information you put in about each experience. The resume is not meant to tell your entire life story. It's meant to tell the employer why you're a good fit for this role based on what they're looking for. So be harsh with yourself, be firm, and cut things out as you need to.
Yeah, I think some of the employers we had in some of the events that we organized suggest maximum 2 pages and experiences that are in the past 10 to 15 years. So not longer than that and not longer than 2 pages. So yeah.
2 pages is a good, that's a good ballpark. I would agree.
Yeah.
Maureen, yes, I said that in your cover letter, you can put the reason why you're applying for a more junior level role. That's fine to explain. Yeah. Do you have a specific recommendation to improve confidence when interviewing? Yeah, a couple of things. Number 1, interviewing is difficult and some people do really great at it. Other people find it much more nerve-wracking. Firstly, getting used to controlling your nerves is important. One method that I've seen a lot of people use is box breathing, or like measured breathing. So my favorite breathing technique, which I learned at a recent like exercise class, is breathe in for 2 seconds, hold for 3 seconds, and then out through your mouth for 4 seconds. So in for 2, hold for 3, out for 4. I find if you do that a few times, you really begin to regulate yourself and begin to calm yourself down. So that's one thing. Second thing is just practicing. A way I like to practice is I'll use my phone and I'll record myself interviewing or answering an interview question. And then that way I can quickly tell what things I'm doing that are distracting. Am I using my hands a lot like I like to? Or am I saying a lot? Or am I avoiding eye contact? So those are the things that help me improve. And then I think just being well prepared. I think just know that the interviewer isn't trying to catch you out. They're just trying to get to know you better. But if you haven't done your research, then of course you're going to feel more nervous. So if you take time to do your research, spend a couple of hours preparing, then I feel like that will help you and make you feel a little bit more confident as well.
Yeah.
And then how to avoid and notice when an interviewer or recruiter are using you as a second option. Oh, that's difficult. I don't know if you can avoid that. I always think never put all of your eggs in one basket. So if that's happening, hopefully you have other options that you're watching progress as well. I don't think you can necessarily avoid it, but I think if you see it happening, then just know that the job likely isn't yours and that you should hopefully begin to look elsewhere for other opportunities.
Yeah, I think on the interview question, a guest that I had on the event said, which was really, really eye-opening for me, is that a lot of interviewees go to the job interview anticipating some questions, but the employer didn't ask any of the questions. So they did not create a chance on their own to make sure to talk about those things that they prepared. So they leave the interview and say, yeah, but the employer didn't ask me any question. And so maybe you can talk around that. Like employers may not ask you the questions that you anticipated or for the questions that you prepared. So how do you find a way to really talk about those things so that you can really grab their attention?
I don't know to what extent you'll be able to weave it in if they don't ask you about it. I just find though, if you're knowledgeable about the job, so you've read through the job description thoroughly, right? And you know it like almost inside out, and you've read about the company. So something I like to do is for the company I'm going for, I'll go on their social media, so their LinkedIn, their Instagram, their X, and I'll read about what they're talking about. And then I'll name drop some of those things in the conversation to show that I have some sense of what they care about. I find that to be really helpful. So even if the interviewer comes out of nowhere and doesn't ask you questions that you expect, at least you've got kind of content or information that you're ready to talk about because you've read up about what they do. Yeah.
And there was a question about as a professional with experience in various industries and multinational companies outside of Canada, do you find it important or disadvantageous to highlight that those positions were outside of Canada?
Yeah, I still think there's a bias towards Canadian experience, and unless an interviewer or an employer looks at your resume and recognizes the name of the company, they won't always value it, unfortunately, as much as they should do. Something that I like to do on my resume is for a company that I know a Canadian has never heard of, I will usually put like a one-line description underneath the company name on my resume to explain what it is. So I'll say something like, Marks and Spencer is Britain's third largest retailer of XYZ, or Marks and Spencer is an e-commerce retailer that brings in the equivalent of 16 billion Canadian dollars of revenue each year, or something like that, just to show in kind of plain English the size or the scope or the focus of their work, to make it easy for someone to understand what it is. So that's what I would say. I do hope this will change. And also maybe the person interviewing you might be a newcomer themselves, so may have a bit more empathy. But I still think it's important to put it on there, particularly if you're new to the country, because otherwise you probably haven't got anything to put on your resume. So still put the non-Canadian work experience on.
And Rose is talking about, I believe, discrimination, somebody being denied the job because of their race.
Yeah, that's really difficult, particularly when you know it's happened. And, you know, there are other reasons why people may deny you jobs for all kinds of discrimination reasons. I remember when I first moved, I found out that the reason why I didn't get the job was because of my immigration status. The job was contract, and I had a 1 or 2 year work permit at the time. But they wanted someone who was only a permanent resident. And so they didn't tell me that when they denied me, but later, a few months later, when I bumped into the interviewer, she was honest with me and told me that was the reason. It's really disappointing. I think one thing that you can try to do is go for organizations who have been maybe leading the way a bit more when it comes to equity work. Sometimes there are lists of like organizations that are great to work for, or maybe who themselves have people who are BIPOC, who are the leaders of the organization. Those are some things that you can look for if that's a real concern for you. So just something to be aware of. And sorry, one other thing is I always think about when I go for an organization, if I look at their team page and there are very few BIPOC folks, to me, that's a red flag, particularly when BIPOC, like people who identify as racialized and not in positions of power. That's a bit of a red flag. So I tend to stray away from organizations like that just because it won't be a good alignment fit for me.
Mm-hmm. Especially if they're organizations whose mission is to support newcomers or low-income folks and things like that. So yeah. Okay. Lots of questions, everyone. In addition to ChatGPT, is there any other resource that would be helpful in creating cover letters?
I need to show you. This is my favorite cover letter ever, and I think it's underutilized. I'll show you this resource. Oh, I don't know if you would have heard of it. So it's called a T cover letter.
T cover letter.
Yeah, this is my favorite cover letter. The only thing with this cover letter is you should only use it if you match everything they're looking for. Do not use this if you only meet 50% of what the employer is looking for in the skills and experience. But basically, a T cover letter is one where rather than using like 3 or 4 blocks of paragraph to explain your interest in the company and why you meet what they're looking for, you basically write a very short intro, and then you create a table where you say, here's what you're looking for, here's how I meet what you're looking for. Let me tell you, like when I sent these out, I think like 3 out of 5 times I would get an interview. And when people have sent me this type of cover letter, I've usually asked them for an interview just because it's absolutely explicit. It's very clear. The employer doesn't need to do any kind of like mass reading through your information to figure out how you match what they're seeking. It's very, very, very clear. So I'd say that you should try using this at least once or twice, see how it works out for you. And then again, it proves that you tailored the cover letter to that organization. because you've made it literally fit what they're looking for.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Again, make sure everyone you click on that link so that you don't lose it. What strategies can I use to manage and present my references effectively in order to increase my chances of getting interview calls in Canada?
I don't know if you can present your references effectively in order to increase your chances of getting interview calls. Usually references don't, references don't usually come until they know they want you, and it's just a final check just to make sure that you're not crazy or something, you're not terrible. So I don't think there's anything you can do. It's more about the application and creating a good impression at the interview stage. Yeah.
And one resource that I want to mention to everybody here, if you're somebody who is a Jumpstart client, you've been with us for a while, you've been proactively engaging in events, and you've been going to speed mentoring or whatever, Jumpstart can be one of your references. I know a lot of you may not have the luxury to have multiple references. So again, as long as you're really proactive, as long as there are things that we can talk about, you feel free to count Jumpstart as one of your references. My Caribbean, speak fast too. How did you slow down?
Wonder where you're from, Nikisha. Are you from Jamaica? Not sure. I'm guessing no, but I'm not sure. Yeah, that's tricky. I think anyone who has an accent that is not Canadian, people may struggle to understand you. I don't know how to slow down, to be honest. I find that people constantly saying to me, like, sorry, I don't understand. I also learned which words people couldn't understand. That was one thing. There are certain words I say, like pretty or butter, anything with two T's, a Canadian usually can't understand. Like there becomes like a miscommunication. So I've just learned to just speak about it at half the pace I usually speak. And then the other thing I had to learn to do was to use the Canadian equivalent of words. There are lots of them for me. Instead of queue, line, instead of trousers, pants, all of that stuff. So I just had to learn how to do that time by time. I also would ask my colleagues or people around me to correct me. And it even happens today where someone will say, I'll say something and they don't understand what I'm saying. And I'm like, okay, do you not use that word here? And they'll say no. And I'm like, okay, in my mind, strike that off the vocabulary list. Can't use that word again. Need to use this word. Like rota was one that we use a lot in England. It's not really used here. You have to use schedule. So I think it takes some time.
Thank you so much, Camara. People, though, the presentation today, the amount of information and tips we received today, people pay a lot of money for that. If you go to people who are doing consulting and whatnot, so please take advantage of this. And I know a lot of you sometimes are very hesitant about events like this. Why are you inviting me for an event instead of giving me a job referral and things like that? So I can't stress enough how important those 10 tips and everything that we've talked about today. I really hope you take advantage of it. And Jumpstart is always available to provide additional connection, additional resources, and additional assistance. Yeah, feel free to follow Camara on LinkedIn. Yeah, please keep engaging in events like this. All the 10 tips that Camara provided today require getting out of your comfort zone and connecting with people and finding way and trying a different way and different things. So please keep doing that. And if you have any question, if you have a job interview lined up, you need somebody to provide you with interview prep assistance, please reach out to us. If you are somebody in a specific industry, you're a professional, you're looking for a mentor, you have the mentorship program at Jumpstart. And so stay engaged, stay optimistic, stay persistent, and stay hopeful, and keep knocking doors, including ours. Camara, thank you very much again. We're very grateful for your expertise and your time, and yeah, we appreciate it.
No worries. And then just one final tip, whenever you add someone on LinkedIn, customize that LinkedIn request and send a little note with it. that's the only way I'll accept a LinkedIn request. So just make sure you say, hi, Camara, I met you at the Jumpstart session, and then I'll accept you. It's good practice for whenever you meet people, particularly recruiters who meet, obviously, I'm sure sometimes hundreds of people a day.
Excellent. Okay, I'll send a follow-up email with the copy of the slides and the recording, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.